Hey guys, thanks so much for tuning into this conversation. For me personally, the reason I wanted to do this was because my buddy DJ actually shot a video about a week and a half ago in light of the George Floyd incident, and really was sharing his heart on racism, sharing his frustration, sharing his hurt and pain. And I hadn't seen that from my brother. I hadn't seen that from a lot of people. And this was just the first time that I felt very, very deeply that I wanted to be a part of the change. I wanted to be a part of a movement that brings people together and bridges the gaps that need to be bridged so that we can move forward in a way that actually heals the damage that's been done. I don't feel qualified or have all the answers, but I did think we could at least have a conversation and get some people together and talk through this issue and hopefully make some progress even just in our immediate context. So I've got a few people here that I want to introduce to you, all different perspectives, all different stories. Just wanted to get together and talk about how we can heal, how we can make a difference. So we've got Tina Weller here. Super excited to have her on. Thanks for accepting the invite to be here. She's the founder of Strengthening Family Ties Institute, and something really interesting that I think she brings to the table is she's married to a white man. Had some very interesting experiences in the church that I hope we get into as a result of that. And so we're excited to hear your perspective. We've got Pastor Travis Davenport. He wanted me to say doctor, but it's just not true. So Travis Davenport, he's the pastor at Covenant Church in Grove City. Excited to have you represent the church here and speak a little bit more to Christians in this context. Got DJ Malone, outside of being one of my good friends. He's really just kind of impacted me a lot recently on all of this. And I wanted to bring his perspective. He's really, I guess, kind of our co-host here. Yeah, he is. So the pressure's on, buddy. But excited to have you on. If you don't know, he's got an awesome food truck, Tasties. You better get online and check it out and support their what they've got going on. And then we've got Joe Hughes. So he is a police officer for Grove City Police Department. We're super excited to have you on, share your perspective. The goal here is for us to be open and honest, to have a real conversation about what's going on. We're just average people trying to make a difference. And so we're trying to be as honest as we can be, as open as we can be, just have a discussion about what's going on. So first question I want to ask, it's not really a question, but a statement for anybody that's willing to start us out. In about a minute or less, I want you to explain a little bit about what's been going through your mind lately in light of these recent events, especially George Floyd and the riots and protests that have taken place thereafter.
I'll start off. I think for me, seeing what I saw was sad, despicable in my eyes, and from the people around me that I've experienced their thoughts on it. My side of law enforcement, it's been scary for myself, just because the hate that I've been receiving and other officers been receiving, some of the things we've got to go involved in with the protests in Columbus. There's just a lot of negativity towards us. So when I leave for work, it's been real scary for the family of what's going to happen, and that's been my personal experience right now.
Honestly, for me, it's at this point, every single day that goes by for me, I kind of have a different type of emotion. Some days I may wake up and be a little bit more angered by it. Of course, the first 2 days afterward, it was a little bit more anger. Some of it goes to being sad, just when you consider the families affected by it, when you consider, the police officers affected by it. There's just so many people that are affected by it. And then you get into, some details, some statistics, some arguments, left and right side, whatever the case may be, when you really start to consider the division that has been going on for such a long time, but also now just trying to bridge that gap, it just naturally brings out a lot of different emotions in you. And honestly, if it doesn't bring out a lot of different emotions in you, then that's probably where we need to start conversations and doing things such as this to be able to have those conversations and thoughts and let people know that and see that. So.
I think for me personally, just kind of to piggyback off of what you said, there's a lot of emotions, because I'm trying to run things through the filter of being a husband, being a dad, being a friend, being a brother, being a son, being a pastor, you know? And, you know, I think what would it be like if, you know, that was, you know, you talk about George Floyd or anybody who's killed unjustly, but specifically George Floyd, what would I feel like if that was my dad, you know? What would I feel like if that was my brother? My emotions would be different, you know? He happens to be somebody that I don't know, happens to be a black man that I don't know, that I've never met. And yet I try to put myself in other people's shoes, because when anybody is killed unjustly, it's hard for us to understand the emotions they're going through. Now add to it the complexity of that person being a different race, you know, in a different state, and it adds to it as well. So I think what I'm walking through personally as a pastor is just hearing so many different sides and different opinions and different thoughts and different emotions, and trying to say, like, okay, how do we strive for unity here? How do we strike a balance where we're all able to talk, all able to understand? Tina's helped me with that to a degree as well. So that's striving for unity. That's been a challenge for sure.
Okay.
Well, for me, when this first happened, a roller coaster of emotions. But it unfortunately wasn't something that I was completely shocked by. And sad to say, because this isn't the first time that I've seen something like this happen, as well as, you know, obviously a number of other people within specific communities. This is something that has been taking place for quite some time. And I think that just within probably the recent maybe 20 years, it's because of technology that these types of things have been publicized. Whereas, like I said, for me, this was not a big shock. But the emotions have just been kind of going up and down, just depending on what day it is and what new information is coming out, and reactions to that new information, things of that nature. So just a lot. And then from the standpoint of being a counselor, dealing with other people's emotions, because a lot of people are struggling with mental health right now, on top of the fact that we were already dealing with a viral pandemic. So now you got this on top of it. I'm dealing with a lot of people that are having some challenges with their mental health. And so it's just, and with me dealing with it, because I'm a person too, so I'm dealing with people's mental health issues as well as trying to deal with my own at the same time about the same issues. It's been a real challenge.
Yeah, I'm going to ask a little bit more about that, because I would imagine that'd be really tough to really try to focus on other people's situation and all of this, but also trying to deal with it yourself. I mean, you said yourself you've been experiencing a wide range of different emotions. What has that been like as you've been trying to help other people, but trying to work through it yourself?
It takes a lot of prayer, a lot of conversations with God, to be completely honest. Because human nature, and as we were talking about on Wednesday, the human heart, it's a wicked thing. And if it's not kept in check, and for me, through the Word of God, it would be all bad, because it would be so easy just to listen to every opinion that's in your ear every 5 seconds and just go with that, just based off of what I'm currently feeling right now. And so to be able to try and keep that in check and keep it in perspective to where it doesn't go off in left field somewhere is difficult, to say the least. Because, you know, obviously what did happen to George, as to why everybody is in the position they are in right now in this country with what's going on, and the reason that we're here today having conversations about this, is because it hasn't, in my opinion, been dealt with successfully in the past. There has been dialogue, there has been movement forward, obviously, but there's still work to be done. And so just trying to keep that perspective in mind and try and manage the emotions that go along with that. Like I said, it's a daily thing that I have to do. I have to pray daily. I have to read daily. I have to have those conversations with God daily. I have to take care of my own mental health, to say the least, before I can help anybody else. Because if my mental health is not together, there's no way that I would be able to help you or you or you to do anything. I'd be no good to you. So I just try and practice daily through prayer and conversations with God to stay grounded.
That's good. That's good. I want to zero in a little bit more on, I think it's hard to deny the reason we're all sitting here is a result of the George Floyd incident, right? For some reason, this has sparked a response that's been unlike any other that I've seen in my short 28 years. But I've seen, at least media has shown us and shed light on many of incidents like this one in the past, but it hasn't sparked a response quite like the one we're seeing today. We've seen people in London protesting. We've seen people in Ireland protesting. I mean, all over the world. And then we've seen a lot going on right here in our backyard, especially in Columbus. You've got protests, you've got peaceful protests, you've had some rioting, looting taking place. But then you've also, I think, from another perspective, people in my shoes, just a normal, everyday person, I've been impacted in such a different way. And I don't know if you guys have, but I was never prompted to have this conversation before with any other incident. What do you think is so different about George Floyd's death that has sparked such a response, maybe even a revolution in our country today?
I wouldn't necessarily say that anything is different. I would just say, coming from the Black community, I think in a lot of different situations you can get to a point to where it's just like, enough is enough. Like, we're just tired. We can't continue to go down this road. Up until this year, as far as televised, racial, police brutality, or it doesn't even have to be that, social injustice, different things like that. Maybe something that happens every now and then, here or there. We'll talk about it for a little bit. It'll fizzle out a little bit. But when this is something that has happened so consistently recently, when you see, of course, the George Floyd thing, when you see the situation in Georgia with the two guys killing a jogger, and then that going, 2 or 3 months without having any justice coming out until the video came out, I think it got to a point with the George Floyd thing in two different ways. Number one, we seen by his cries and by the videotaper's cries, so to speak, we seen a lot of different people affected even in that moment. Yeah. So you had, of course, him sitting there screaming out for his mom, or screaming out, "I can't breathe." And then you had people on the side screaming, "He can't breathe, checking, blah, blah, blah." Like, you seen different people affected in that moment. So then it gets to a point to where, for us, it's like, we're just tired of it. We're tired of continuously having to so-called saying peaceful protest and just talking about it in a tweet or talking about it in a speech for maybe a celebrity or somebody like that. Like, none of this stuff has happened. None of this stuff has really created the change that we know that we need. And then specifically for the George Floyd thing, it was just like, okay, like, this is showing y'all how crazy things have been up to this point. But also, we've been able to show you that it's gone, 2-3 days before, justice was even started in the situation. As far as the police officer not even being arrested for a couple days, or the other 3 guys or 4 guys that was involved in it, it went a whole week before they were. So, it was just tiring. It's just like, at this point, we don't want to deal with it anymore. And it was something that was so emotional in that moment with the cries especially. I think it was, I seen yesterday people talking about when you get moms outraged because you had him screaming for his mom, and when you get moms outraged, that's when you know that you're about to You know what I mean? The whole blunt of it's about to come. Because now the mamas that's sitting at home watching that video, they're like PT said, I can only imagine if this was my son or my daughter, and having to live through that. So I think that's what's really sparked that in a way that has caused us to do things like this. So,
well, I think extreme situations, right, create great polarization. Because when you watch that video, I really don't think that there's a person who would watch that video who could justify any part of it. You know what I mean? I've talked with you, I've talked with other of our friends who are in the police force, I've talked with other pastors, I've talked with a lot of people. There's not one person who could say, yeah, how that went down, that's normal. No, that was abnormal, it was wrong, it was evil, it was awful. But it's an extreme situation, so what it does is it creates very polarizing sides. And I think that's what's to a degree being discovered is like there's just the polarization and the disunity and people choosing sides. And it's like, you know, when you have a conversation and you feel like this would be like conversation, okay? It's almost like you're forced to choose a side, you know, and you can't be both. It's like I can either love black people and dislike cops, or I can love the police, and that means I dislike black people or Asian people or Hispanic. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And it's like extreme situations create great polarization and make you choose sides. And I know I'm going to pull the pastor card here. So okay. When you look at when you look at Jesus, he was a uniter. He took parties that were extremely separated and stood in the middle and brought them together. I mean, there's no greater example than Jews and Gentiles. Completely different race, right? Extremely different. I mean, so separated that Gentiles couldn't know God. You know what I mean? That's extreme racial distance, completely different. And Jesus bridges the gap, brings them all together. And so I think, you look at that, Jesus standing up for the adulterous woman, Jesus standing up for the lives of children, Jesus standing up to the Samaritan at the well. I mean, over and over and over, Jesus is the uniter, breaking party lines and saying, like, I don't care. Right. I don't care about that. I don't care about, listen, I'm about this business right here. And so that's why we got to strive for unity, you know, in all of our conversations. And I think that happens when I begin to understand that I don't have your perspective, A, because I'm not a woman, you know what I mean? And so that's there. I mean, that's out, you know. And then B, I'm not a black woman. And so the way that you view the world is going to be different than the way that I view the world. I mean, you're a white dude. The way that you view the world, you grew up in Baltimore, going to be different than I view the world. I grew up in Ohio. Right. So your perspective is going to be different. The uniting factor, though, that we have is the gospel. Mm-hmm. And so I might not have a lot in common with you. I might not have a lot in common with you. I'm not a cop. I don't have a lot in common with you. But the one thing that we do have in common is the gospel of Jesus Christ. Yeah. So that's the uniting thing, I believe.
Yeah, so I want to talk about that a little bit more. I'm glad we got into that so quickly. I feel that a lot of the response you'll get outside of the church to that message is not super positive in that, number one, the gospel in and of itself is offensive. You know, you're telling someone there's a sin issue in their heart. Yeah. It needs to be changed for there to be any change in yourself to begin with, let alone, across the country or the globe when it comes to an issue like this. Those people that are saying, you know what, I get where you're coming from, Pastor, but I've been dealing with racism from people that even say they're saved for so long. You know, it's kind of like, on one hand, it's like, yeah, I get where you're coming from, but this is happening to me right now. What do you say to those people with those thoughts?
Are you talking as somebody who has experienced racism?
Yeah.
What do you say to somebody who is experiencing racism currently?
And what they're hearing is, well, the answer is you've got to get saved. And maybe they've had Christians that have discriminated against them or been racist against them in their lifetime.
Well, I mean, I think you got to be honest. You know, I think you got to like I just said, I think conversations like this, you know, first, I mean, I think in the end of the day, we mentioned this the other day, it's not a skin issue, it's a sin issue. Yeah. But we have to acknowledge there is a skin issue here. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, and so I think as the church, it's important for us to call out evil when we see it, and insert the gospel into it. And so I think the job of white individuals, right, is to acknowledge that we don't understand the perspective of people who aren't our same skin color or lack of. I'm pink, but you know what I'm saying, right? There's white and then there's me. Okay. I think it's our job to take a stand for people who can't take a stand for themselves. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's our job to do that. And I think that's what's so amazing about the church. We have doctors in our church. We have law enforcement in our church. We have professors in our church and teachers in our church, stay-at-home moms in our church. And if we take a stand at times when other people can't take a stand, when it comes to race, when it comes to finances, when it comes to anything, right? We have to stand in the gap for people. And that's what Jesus Christ consistently did, you know? And I think that's what it means to be the church, standing up for somebody when they're saying something and people aren't hearing it. It's my job to come alongside and help them be heard.
I think too, like what you were saying, Dylan, about the people that don't believe in Jesus, let's say, and because they're involved in this too. Now you're working on a completely different platform, because they don't have any concept of Jesus, who he is, what he's done, and they don't buy it. Okay, let's be honest, they don't buy it. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to know about it. I've had these conversations with people, some of which are in my family, while all of this is going on. And I actually, we're talking about posts that I put on some social media, and one of them was to my cousin, because he doesn't believe in God. He doesn't want to hear about God. And so when you come from a perspective of, I don't believe in God, but here's all this stuff happening, he's a black man, and he's angry, he's hurt. So I can't necessarily talk to him about Jesus fixing this for him. He won't hear it. So I even told him, I said, you know, you and I, we really can't even have a conversation about this so much. We can have it to an extent because we're both African American, but we can't agree on what the solution is. Right. Because for me, the solution is Jesus. I agree 100%. It is the sin issue. It's in the heart of man, because the heart of man is wicked. But I can't get that point across to my cousin who doesn't believe in Jesus. Right. So, and to be quite honest, he's just kind of fed up with white people, period. And me trying to kind of talk to him and say, you know, you can't go around with that in your heart and live your life that way, because that's just going to produce more hatred, more problems. You can't live that way. It's not going to turn out well. So for those people that are in that particular group where they don't believe in God, how do we have those conversations with them? So
that's what I'm really getting at. How do you speak to those people?
You have to look at it from, like you were saying, it has to be approached from a skin issue, because the underlying matter of what we understand it to be as Christians is a sin issue, but they're not going to buy that. So we do have to come and look at it from a standpoint of being a skin issue. So we have to say, you know, okay, yes, let's take a look at this, talk about the issue of racism, find some solutions to it, let's make a plan, let's get some things together in a peaceful manner and move forward with this. So you do have to kind of, unfortunately, for the time being, leave out the part about Jesus. I hate to say that because I believe in Jesus wholeheartedly, but as a counselor, I've always been trained that if you're going to reach people, if you're going to help people to change their thoughts, to change their behaviors, you have to meet them where they're at. That's where they're at. So I have to approach it, for me, from that issue of being a skin problem. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean.
I think our approach as Christians has to first begin with showing as much love and showing the light that we have in ourselves. Because ultimately, to make this pretty quickly, like ultimately for me personally, if Jesus is living through me and the gospel is living through me and I'm showing love and I'm being the light, at some point the darkness is going to consider like, all right, where's he getting his love from? Where's he getting this light at? And then they may begin to start asking those questions that may end up leading to that perspective of being able to bring that non-believer in. So like, in this situation, how are you being so positive? How are you having these conversations? How are you still showing this love to people? And then you be able to say like Jesus, Jesus is living through me. I'm being a vessel in this moment, and hopefully in some way, somehow, I'm able to shine that light to where somebody else wants to join that side and join that cause. And it's definitely not easy, which, being a Christian outside of a pandemic and outside of this mess that we're living in is difficult anyway. But we still have to shine that light, and we still have to show that love in this situation to where people will want to be attracted to that and be a part of that. So that might be an option.
Well, what's easier, to say you love somebody or to show that you love somebody? When I think about the greatest thing that Christ ever did, it didn't involve words, right? His death on the cross. Mm-hmm. And that is what speaks to an unbelieving world, his action, right? And so I think for the church, I'm going to throw it under the bus for a minute, okay? The church. For years and years and years, we've said that we love, but then these opportunities have presented themselves to show that we love, and we've been scared to act. Now, not every church, right? But by and large, a lot of times we haven't stepped up because, and a lot of times we have, but in these racial areas, I don't think we've been united with our black brothers and sisters in other churches and formed bridges in the way. And now you have a polarizing incident and people crying in the streets. You just heard Joe say, man, we're scared to go to work. Our families, we're kissing our kids goodbye. I mean, it's, and he's my brother in Christ. You're my sister in Christ. And so for us as a church, what speaks to an unbelieving world isn't the fact that we say we love them. It's that we show them that we love them. Now, how we go about that, I think, is what we're trying to learn and listen to find information about.
Yeah, and you started to talk on your perspective.
I was just going to share kind of the same thing. You don't have to speak of Jesus to show Jesus. Yeah. And eventually people are going to see it through you, through your actions, and they're going to come asking. Right. So whether it's a 2-day span or a 2-year span, they're going to see a difference in you, and they're going to come asking, why are you different than everyone else I talk to? Yeah. And that's where you can start pushing into Jesus. And they may fight back still, but they're still going to, if you keep showing them and showing them, they're going to come back.
And I agree with everything that everybody here said about that, because that's actually what my post was on social media. It was that, and you probably have seen it, it was that picture with like 4 black guys. They were connected in arms, and there was a police officer that had got disconnected from his unit and surrounded by a hostile crowd that wanted to get to this guy. And they protected him. And that's the post that I put on, where I got the opposition, the pushback from my relative, who was saying, well, if that had been, the opposite, where it would have been a bunch of cops around and then the black guy was by himself, they probably would have did this to him. They would have done that to him. And that's when I had to tell him, I said, look, we operate on 2 different wavelengths as far as belief systems. Yeah. And I said, so the approach that I have to take in this when I post something like this is to show the light of Jesus. And that's actually what my post said. It said that the love and light of Yahweh God will always pierce the darkness. That's what I said. And that's when he came back and what that had been the other way, it would have been this or that. And it was like, I don't know if it would have been or it wouldn't have been. I don't know that. I said, but what I do know is what's being said in this picture. And what's being said in this picture is they are showing the light of and love of Jesus Christ by protecting this guy and not letting the crowd have their way with him. So I know, and I agree, we do have to just meet people where they're at, understand that they don't believe or they have a different belief system, but be the light, walk the walk, talk the talk. Be Jesus to people who maybe you've never even opened the Bible before. That's the only way that maybe they'll ever even know what's in it, is by looking at the way you live your life. So I agree 100%. And I definitely think that that's where we need to start for people that don't have a foundation with Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
She said something the other day in our conversation I thought was awesome. It was so good. Well, it just...
Most of what she says. Awesome.
Well, it helped me because I feel like I'm a fixer. I want to fix things. Yeah. I want to help people. When I hear that some of my friends are scared to go to work, or some of my other friends are scared to drive through town, what can I do? What can I say? And one of the things that you said was, you don't have to have the right words, and you talked about, you likened it to somebody who's giving birth. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because that helped me, in all honesty, because I want to have the right words, and you're like, no, it's not about the right words. Talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so I gave the scenario of, as far as what is needed, as far as, because Black people, we're in the fight. We know what we need to do to bring about equality and to strive for that. But for those who are not Black, our brothers and sisters in Christ and others, what can we do? Because I get that question a lot. Well, what can we do to help? And it's not always about running to go fix it, so to speak. But it's like a woman who is getting ready to give birth. She goes into the delivery room. She may take, her husband or a birthing support person with her. And this person that goes in with her can't stop the pain. That person cannot give birth for her. But what they can do is be there by her side, hold her hand, and just be in the room with her. And so the answer to that question from people who are not Black as to what can I do, you can be in the room with us. Yeah. We're not necessarily saying that you have to solve the problem for us or fix what's wrong with everything, so to speak, but just be there with us. And we're seeing shadows and of that right now, because we have people who are not white. We've got a lot of people who are not Black, I should say, who are out there doing the peaceful protesting, who are side by side with their African American brothers and sisters, helping. They are doing whatever they can to make sure that our police officers are not being attacked. They're out there making, because, by the way, there are Black police officers too. Yeah. And people have been showing how they've been getting attacked, being called things like an Uncle Tom or other terrible words. Yeah. Right. And they care about their communities just as much as any other person does, or else they wouldn't put on the uniform, they wouldn't put on the shield, they wouldn't go out there every day and do the job that they are doing if they didn't care. Yeah. So it's just about being in the room with us. And that means if you see something, say something. Don't stay silent on the issue. And that's one of the things that I've kind of been talking to people about, because I see people who are posting things, who are saying things. I'm having conversations with people where they are outraged because of the looting and the stealing that's going on, which, by the way, I have made completely clear that I do not agree with. You don't take things that don't belong to you. You don't destroy things. But here's the problem with that. The people that I've seen posting things, I go back and I look on social media to see if they've mentioned anything about how we got to this point. Meaning, did they say anything about having outrage for a man having his neck sat on for over 8 minutes and couldn't breathe and eventually died, and we watched it on social media? And I look back at all these people who are outraged about the animals and the thugs who are destroying things. And I don't see one post about a man that lost his life unjustly. Yeah. Subtle things the overt things we can see, it's easy to see. It's the subtle things that oftentimes get past us. And so when I'm looking at this, I'm like, well, how are you so outraged about property? Because that's what we're talking about, property, but you have not a single word to say about the loss of a human life. I don't understand that. And so and then they'll come back and they'll say, well, people shouldn't do that. And once again, I agree with that. It shouldn't happen. But then I also think back, and this is where you get a lot of the thoughts of Black people coming up and the emotions that we have, because when we look back to years past, like in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s even, for example, Black Wall Street, if anybody's ever Googled that or know what it is, Black Wall Street was a predominantly African-American community in Oklahoma where they were thriving. They were economically independent, they were doing great, they were doing well, but they started to get just a little too economically independent. And an accusation was made that a Black man had assaulted a white woman. There was a group of citizens that decided to get together from an all-white community, go into Black Wall Street, and they burned it to the ground. Over 300 people died, no arrests, no court, no conviction. And that was just one isolated incident. So when Black people see things like what happened to George Floyd, and they're remembering, because we're talking about Black people who, number one, are still living, or who this happened to their grandparents or their great-grandparents. So they have some immediate connection with this. And then they see, and they know about those things that have happened, but then they see this. And they're like, so where's the arrest? Yeah. Where's the court? Where's the conviction? And when nothing happens, I think a lot of times that's where the outrage comes.
Maybe it's not even if something happens, it's like the acknowledgement. And so maybe even, we're talking about being in the room, but maybe as followers of Christ, maybe as the church, before you can be in the room, you have to acknowledge that there is a room to be in.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
And so sometimes I think, and you can give me your perspective here, one of the things that you just said I thought was so good. We see outrage over looting and rioting, and understandably so. That hits you every single day. Yeah. That's the stuff you're dealing with. Yeah. That's very real. And so once again, that's why it's so polarizing, because that's very real for you. And maybe on your side, we're saying, okay, I see that, but where's the acknowledgement of injustice?
Right.
And once again, it pushes us to sides, like either you're for justice or you're for cops. You see, the ridiculously of that.
Very ridiculous.
And once again, it's like you're either for Black people or for white people, for this community, for that community. And it's like, no, you can stand for this and for that and call for and that's once again the gospel. Sorry, that's why I'm here. Just once again, the only thing that solves that is the gospel. Right? Is the acknowledgement of Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit, to change hearts.
Yeah, absolutely. I want you to talk a little bit more about your experience, because you started to touch on something super important there, that there are people, even people that call themselves Christians, that are so open about, condemning the rioting, condemning the looting, but we haven't heard one peep about the actual injustice that's happening to Black people, or just for that matter, anyone that's not white, all across the globe, but a lot here in the United States that doesn't get spoken about, doesn't get brought to the forefront. There's a lot of people that aren't speaking on that, but they're quick to talk about everything else that's going on. Right. How's that affected you?
Man, it's been super, super difficult. It's a huge weight. Part of the perspective that I bring to it is I'm mixed. I'm white and I'm Black. So in so many of these situations, it's like I'm trying to see your side of it because I have white family, I have white friends. I'm trying to see, you know, the black side of it because I have black friends and black family. But I think, you know, yeah, the George Floyd thing, like I said, it was something that was just like, we're just tired of it. But it's not just simply just to say that it was a white cop with his knee on a black male. It can't be that simple. In my eyes, it can't be that simple because number one, yes, white cops kill white people. Yeah, black people kill black people. You know what I mean? And then when people, you know, my biggest frustration really in a lot of ways is like, all right, this happened. Well, what did he do to deserve this cop doing this to him? Or, you know, trying to make all these different excuses of let's not think about the real issue. Let's try to bring in something else to try to combat that, which is completely unfair, which is completely just silly, honestly. But, you know, as far as, you know, social injustice, police brutality, you know, we've had conversation about just white privilege in general in the judicial system and, you know, just the incarceration percentages and stuff like that, even in some of the statistics that we've kind of looked at and considered. There's just so many different things that have continuously been piled up, you know, and for me as a black man that, you know, I associate with, if I use my association with that, you know, I've had my moments. Some of them have been really subtle. Some of them have been, you know, everyday things that I notice, but then some of them of being pulled over, being, you know, having 5 police officers having to come to your car when they don't even tell you why you've been pulled over, or to have to sit there for 3 hours and have 2 or 3 different police officers say, well, he pulled you over for this, and then another one coming over, well, he pulled you over for that, and you're being asked, do you have weapons of mass destruction in your trunk, or do you have contraband in your trunk? It's just like, are we serious right now? Like, do we really, is this really necessary in a way where a black man who, like I've said on my post, like, outside of 2 months in the summertime, I'll look like y'all most of the time just because I'm so light. And for me to still, and for me to still be in situations like that, obviously it shows that there is an issue, and it's far greater. And again, in some of the statistics we look at, like the darker that you are, the more chances you are into being pulled over, the more chances that you are of getting a higher sentence in prison or whatever the case may be. And it's just all of these little things, you know, I could sit here for days and dwell on and think about just all of the injustices that I've personally encountered. And this is me being, you know, very light-skinned, living in all different types of cultures and situations and living arrangements and different things like that. It's tough. It's mind-blowing that you have a desire to be able to overcome this stuff, and you make a little bit of progress here and there, and then you have that pullback or that pushback. Then you might make a little bit of progress, and then you might just get tired. Like you might be outraged for a month, and then you just get tired of fighting and not seeing any change. And then you're just like, all right, let's just go back to the way we was until another situation happens. Yeah. And you know, that's just kind of the life that you wrestle with and you deal with in this culture, unfortunately.
Can I ask a question? Can I say some question to Joey from what you said? Because I think, man, that was really good, what you said. You fight and you fight and you fight, and then you just kind of, and then another instant, you fight and you fight and you fight and you fight. And you kind of get this like combat fatigue to a degree. Right. You know, it's like I've heard of compassion fatigue, where now because of social media, because of just media in general, you see so much hurt and so much pain, and you can only take so much until you're like fatigued from it. And I think now on social media, Like, I remember when I first got on Facebook, it used to be like, oh, I'm talking to my friends and hey, what's going on? You know, and now it's just like heavy, heavy, heavy. And then there's a cat playing the piano. And then it's heavy, heavy, heavy. You know what I'm talking about? And it's like we get fatigued. Mm-hmm. It's like, which issue should I give all of my emotion to today? Because there's only so much of me. And I think for me personally, this is where I wanted to throw Joe in a little bit. Because as it pertains to doing something, loving, caring, and fighting for an issue, I mean, I know I'm a pastor and I preach and I talk and I meet with people and share the gospel, but on a daily basis, Joey, you're doing more to fight against injustice, racism, like than me ever, because you're doing that every single day. Can you speak to that a little bit from the perspective of a Christian police officer? How does that look like? What does that look like for you going into work every day with what's going on and what's that perspective?
So the community I work in, it's primarily a white community. We have a lot of people from Columbus come down. So we're working with people from everywhere, but primarily white. Where I work, I don't feel that as much. I don't see the racism. I'm not denying that it's out there, and where in the community I work in, with the officers I work in, I've never seen it. I've been here almost 12 years. It's hard when you're trying to remain in control of situations, whether someone's white or black. When I'm sent on a call, I'm trying to show them, for me, the compassion of Christ that I have in me, and treat them with respect. No matter what race they are, but a lot of times there's extreme pushback, and you just get to the point it's draining. You were just constantly being pushed back on, and you're like, I didn't go and seek out somebody. I wasn't just randomly driving around and then said, hey, what do you, and jumped out. You know, it's like a hypothetical. So I was sent here because you got caught stealing from the store. And I'm here because you got caught. You know, you have that in your purse. You stole that. That's theirs, right? And I'm called a racist for it. And I'm like, and it does, like you said, that constant combat fatigue, it just drains on you, and you try to show the compassion of Christ, but that just over and over and over just breaks you down, and you almost throw in the flag, and you're like,
Can you share that story?
Yeah, so
Downtown.
The recent protest, we had a white female officer who was at a post by herself, and she hears some screaming. Obviously, she figures out where it's come. There's a car. She runs over to help, and they're saying he's bleeding. From my understanding, they took him out of the car. A guy had been shot in a domestic situation, eventually is what was discovered. She's running an aid to this guy. She's trying to save his life. She's a white female cop. This is a black male. She's putting chest seals on him, trying to stop the bleeding. And from her perspective, it was extreme. This was bad. And why the whole time she's on the ground trying to save this guy, people are just walking by her, coming out of the protest areas from Columbus, and screaming, cussing, saying, "Kill the police," George Floyd's name. Hands up, don't shoot. And the whole time she's doing this, she's trying to save this man's life, not knowing what's behind her head. And she's just terrified the whole time. I'm going to get hit with a rock. I'm going to get shot. I'm going to get punched. Fortunately, we were able to get another officer with her. And both of their accounts, it was very sketchy. They were scared. And all they're trying to do, they don't care who this guy is, male, female, black, white, Asian, Hispanic. It's our job. We're called to do this. We're put in a situation that we weren't expecting. We were expecting to go down and block some roads far from the protest that day. And this was just thrown into her plate. And that'll wear on you. That's something she will remember forever, that I was trying to save this black man's life. And no matter how much of support of black can you get as a white female officer, I'm trying to keep this man alive. And people are behind you. They don't care what you're doing. And that'll be an impression on her that'll be, I'm sure, hard to break for a long time.
So if From your perspective, coming from just this conversation and wanting to grow, but also from a from a person in a black community, would you say that maybe you go to different situations, you may not look at things black and white, you're just going to go address the situation that's at hand, and maybe you feel the same thing that's in your department and so forth, so on. Is that something that has been systematically trained in you from the law enforcement side, or is that something that's primarily been your upbringing, other people's upbringing? And maybe two-part question is, if it is something that maybe isn't addressed to the department-wide, is it something that should be done more? Is it not necessarily because these situations are going on, but do you feel like there could be more done in law enforcement as far as training and understanding the divide and the racial connotations and stuff?
For sure. So I'm not sure I was in the academy 12 years ago. 12 years ago, yeah, there's training. There's racial profiling and bias training that you go through to prevent these things, to understand what they are, the legalities of it. You go through all that. So I'm trained then. Within our agency, we've gone through a few different times in my 12 years of retraining, bringing it up, and other things, even sexual harassment training, similar type things, or just we do go through that. Can you do more training? I think you can do more training in everything. And it will benefit us? Yeah, I think so. I don't think it'll ever hurt. There's maybe other agencies. Again, I'm working in a primarily white community. Columbus, there's I don't know how many thousands of officers. You may have one officer that works in a primarily black community almost his whole career, and he's a white officer. He may need some more of that retraining because of like that combat, like you said, that combat fatigue, where you throw in the flag, you're like, I'm done, I don't care. More than the Columbus officer who's way up somewhere else where it's primarily white. So yeah, some other agencies may need it more than others. Some specific officers may even need it just because of the community they work in over another. But I know I've received training myself. Our agency has quite a bit. I know there's a standard set by Ohio that we require so many hours of it. So every officer in Ohio has gone through that same training. Different agencies do more than others.
In your opinion, would you consider, in a lot of these situations that have been televised, been videoed, of police brutality, so forth, so on, would you attribute that, just in your opinion, to a lack of training maybe in some of these places, or would you attribute it more towards these personal beliefs of officers?
One thing's lack of training. The bigger the agency, the less training you get. So it's just a fact. It's too hard to train that many people and provide good training. So, and that's just my personal knowledge and experience. So yeah, lack of training in defensive tactics. We train on that a lot. And watching that video, I'm looking at saying, okay, well, he's cuffed. I don't know all the circumstances. I wasn't standing there. I can't argue that constantly, but I can say, for me, once you're cuffed, let's move to the next thing. What's the next step? I don't know what the weight was there, so again, I can't argue for him. But lack of training, yeah. Get him cuffed, let's move on, render aid, if you can, if things aren't progressing. That is a training situation. Some agencies will do a lot of defensive tactics in an academy and do very little after. It's the same thing as riding your bike. If you don't ride a bike for 10 years and you go to ride a bike, you're going to be a little squirrely for a little while. So it's something that it's repetitive. Firearms training, all that stuff. You got to do it a lot to become good at it.
So what happens when you put lack of training with somebody who does have a bias towards someone?
Yeah, potentially you could get a serious situation. The difference.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, yeah. The difference you have with these situations and officers, you don't know what's happened that day. And unfortunately, I'm sure you came home from work frustrated, worn out, and snipped at your wife, and she's looking at you like, "What? Don't you dare come home and talk to me like I didn't do nothing to you."
She wouldn't do it.
No, she wouldn't. She's from Kentucky.
She'd whack you upside with a switch.
Well, I can tell you this. I'm glad that some of those moments haven't been caught on camera
Yeah, for sure.
and put for the world.
Let me emphasize on something that I've experienced. Again, for me, the way we operate within our agency is this may be a district that 2 officers, 3 officers are assigned to. I have ran into houses and done CPR, and they're gone, they're dead. And I've walked right back out the front door to their friends, their family, and I tell them right then, "No, I'm sorry, he's dead. He didn't make it." I've done that with kids, I've done it with old people, I've done it with teenagers, and there's 3 of us in this district. We've got other calls to do. All 3 of us aren't staying here. We've kind of looked around, I'll take this one. I get in my car and I drive away. That's the end of it for me. I literally did CPR on a guy, he's dead, I tell them he's dead, and I drive away. And I get called to your barking dog complaint. And then you wonder why an officer may be a little bit more angry, emotional. And then people get angry and mad at us. And he shouldn't. We should treat everyone fair. I should come into it the same way. I'm going to have bad days. I'm going to be upset. So when you get that fight back, maybe on a traffic stop where you just stop somebody because they ran a red light in front of you and 30 people in the intersection are looking at you and you're like, I got to do something about this. So you go stop them and immediately the guy starts arguing and screaming with you and you flip out on him. I'm not saying a George Floyd flip out, but you flip out on him. It's all on video. Everybody sees it. It looks bad. It's not appropriate. It's not excused. There may be some underlying issues to that. And people don't realize, I think people think we stop cars, we write tickets, we take reports. We do all that. There's a lot more things we do.
So some underlying mental health issues.
Yeah, potentially.
So
You do.
That kind of brings me to a question then. Knowing that, and when I say mental health, because people usually place a terrible negative thing on it, and that's not what it means. It just means exactly what you just explained. I could be having a bad day. I could have experienced something really traumatic that day, and now I'm getting another call going somewhere else, and I'm getting this in my ear when I'm already trying to deal with what I just dealt with like 10 minutes ago. That was traumatic. So what kind of mental health services are provided for police officers? Because they do go through a lot. As we were talking before we got started with all this, my husband is a former police officer who is also white. And there's some stories to tell you about that too. But what kind of mental health services are being provided for officers so that they can keep themselves in a good place mentally?
So I was involved in a shooting in 2011. Before I can even return to work, I had to go see a psychologist to be talked to about it. That's part of our process. That's in place. It's gonna happen. You don't have a choice. Whether you want to or not, if you're not ready to talk to someone, you're gonna go talk to somebody. And based on his evaluation, they'll make the decision. Our agency is really good about, in some of these situations where maybe it's a younger child, something more traumatic, we're really good about the supervisor and other officers are good about, are you okay, you good, you need anything? We're providing free care if we need it. We have an employee service program. It's anonymous. The agency's not going to know about it. If I need to go talk to someone, I can go talk to somebody. It's there. It's available. And I feel our supervision and our administration with our agency is good about recognizing those tough calls. Every officer is different. You try to read them. I've seen, I don't know how many dead people at this point. I remember a specific few that stand out to me. Do I need to get help for all of them? No, that's just my mentality of it. For me, what's best for me, there's probably a few that you should. And you need to be willing to. People in law enforcement are typically A-type personalities. And that's a struggle.
Explain that a little bit.
And so an A-type personality, without opening up the book and reading it, we're dominant, we're in control. You have to be. To stay alive, you have to be, I have to control this situation so I can get out of it, resolve it successfully, and get out of it alive, and everyone's alive and happy. That's the biggest thing in law enforcement. Control your situation around you. So on the flip side of that, A-type personality is also hard to accept fault and accept help, to admit that something's wrong, I need it. And that's where, as in law enforcement, we need to look after each other and be able to recognize it, see the changes in people and their personalities, and working with the same guys day after day after day on the same shifts. That makes it easy. But maybe it's a different place where you move around, you're not together, and that can be really hard.
So I think the topic of mental health is, and I'm learning in this conversation, it's probably a lot more relevant to this discussion than I ever imagined. I think it's super important to talk about mental health in law enforcement, because you experience things, just as you're sharing with me, I never would have imagined that you've dealt with. I can't understand the weight of trying to save a life, finding out there's no chance, and then going and telling their family members, he's gone, he or she's gone, and you drive off and go about your day. I can't imagine what that feels like. From the other side of it, I think of something that you brought up before this in some of the questions we talked through, this idea of post-traumatic slave syndrome, something I have never heard about in my life until you sent it over to me. I'm wondering, can you speak a little bit about what that is and the effect that you think it has on Black Americans today?
Sure. So post-traumatic slave syndrome is a mental health theory because it is not currently in the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that's how you diagnose mental health disorders. It's not currently included, but there has been a lot of push for it to be included for this very reason that we're experiencing right now. But what it is basically, in a nutshell, it's looking at the history and the systemic racism that Black people have experienced, and how from the time that we were brought here to this continent, that how all of those experiences have not only affected our ancestors' mental health, but how has it filtered down, and how has it affected the mental health of Black people in 2020. And specifically when issues of racism are on the table like they are right now. Because a lot of what we are looking at with the different ways that this post-traumatic slave syndrome is coming out is years upon decades upon centuries filtered down of oppressed emotions coming out now. Not that to say, again, because mental health, you're responsible for your own mental health and you need to be able to get help for that. But it's a real thing, even to the point to where people mention the whole Black on Black crime thing. That also is a byproduct of post-traumatic slave syndrome. And what I mean by that is where during slavery times, you had people who looked like you, and then there were people who looked like me, because a lot of the slave owners did have children, so they were biracial people. But they were not accepted as white people. But what they did get is better labor assignments. So for example, they would be able to work in the house. So say, just taking you and me, for example, because you've identified as being biracial, I am not. And so if we had been back in 1712 or something, and slavery's going on, he may have gotten a job inside of the house where he was able to sleep inside the house instead of sleeping in the slave quarters. He would have been given better clothing. He would have been given better food. He would have been shown, he may have even been taught how to read. Whereas me, my job would have been more likely in the field doing the work. I would have been sleeping in the slave quarters. I would not have had nicer clothes. I would have gotten scraps from the table. That in itself caused a divide within the Black community itself that has filtered down through the centuries. If you talk to some Black people and you ask them about the brown bag test, they'll know pretty much for the most part what you're talking about, especially if you're talking about it to a Black person that may be in their 40s, 50s, 60s, or later. And what that is Black people would, and it might still be going on, oh God, I hope it's not, but where they used to determine which Black people they were going to associate with or who were going to be allowed to move into their Black neighborhood based on the brown bag test. And that's when they would take a brown paper bag, they would hold it up to your skin, and if you were darker than that brown paper bag, they would not associate with you. You could not join this club. You could not live in this neighborhood just based, or your kids couldn't play with their kids if they didn't pass the brown bag paper test. So these are the kinds of things that are examples of post-traumatic slave syndrome, because it's been ingrained psychologically to hate yourself based on your skin color. So this is not just a conversation in terms of racism about white people hating us, but it's an internal hatred sometimes that is taking place if we're going to be completely transparent about everything. And so not only as a Black person are you trying to deal with that internal racism that you got going on, but you're dealing with the external racism as well, coming from other people and other ethnicities. So it's a twofold thing.
I would imagine, I can't speak for it because I'm white, right? So I can't speak for that experience, but I can't imagine the weight of feeling like you're constantly seen as an enemy by people that don't look like you, and also you're your own enemy. That would be incredibly debilitating. And so it kind of gives me perspective on how a Black person in America could feel today when they say, I'm not afforded the same opportunity. I don't have the same ability to rise up the ranks like you do simply because you're white. You know, I'm not given the same opportunities. You have people on the other side, particularly white people, that will say, well, if you just do this, 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 and this, and get your degree, and you'd stop doing some of the things you're doing, then you'd probably have the same opportunities. That's very, very far from the truth. And the more you talk about that, the more I realize it's not just society. It's not just the culture we live in. It's also your own personal issues you have to work through about your past that you weren't even a part of, but because you've come through generations that have dealt with that, you automatically have to deal with some of those issues. So I want to hear from you a little bit about that. I don't know if you've ever heard of post-traumatic slave syndrome. I never have. This is new to me, but can you see how that might have effects today?
Absolutely. I've not done a ton of research and know a ton about it, especially to hear, specific descriptions of it, so to speak. I definitely can see how it would be very, very relevant in today's society. I do my best, honestly, and it is a weight on me as well, but I do my best to try to ignore a lot of those different things because, I'm not one to really dwell on excuses and dwell on problems as much as trying to find solutions, at least for myself. So, I do everything I can to try to, even though I know that things are there, even though I see them, even though I witness them, even though I've been a part of these situations, I can admittedly say, I've tried to navigate personally to try to get around them as much as I possibly can, because a lot of times our culture and the Black community, it can be easy to use that as an excuse and just continue to throw that out there instead of just fighting against it. And fighting against it is not simply just going out and protesting and burning and doing this and that, although in some ways that may be the route, that may be what needs to be done. But in some ways it's looking at yourself and being able to figure out different ways to navigate it in a way that can bring change just as much as the alternative. And again, like I'm not one to dwell on excuses, and I don't think it's fair for us to just simply, and I try to be careful in saying this, not saying that it's not a real thing. I'm not saying that it's not something to be discussed, but I hope that we're not just simply just dwelling on that as an excuse to not try to cross that bridge or to not try to fix it in a way that can eventually bring inclusion and bring, fairness throughout everything. Because I think in all of it, we all hold a responsibility. We all, whether we're white or black, we hold responsibility for how we got to where we are, and we hold responsibility of how we're going to get to where we're going. And we have to accept both sides of that to a point to where we can't use those things as excuses. We have to find alternatives because,
Next question.
yes, sir.
Is ignorance an excuse? So for me as a white guy, just as a person, I've never heard what you're talking about. I've never heard that. I've never heard of holding a brown paper bag up to somebody's face, right, and saying, never heard that before. Is that an excuse for me, though? Because I've never heard of that. Is ignorance an excuse for me, right?
I wouldn't say it is. I wouldn't say it's an excuse for you to the point of we've tried to voice out a lot of things. The culture has tried to voice out a lot of things for so long to where if in some way, somehow, maybe you haven't known of the specific term to it and the specific situations that have happened, or maybe you can get by with that to a little bit, but at least you would have at some point listened, acted in some way to where now you can look back on it and say, yeah, that does kind of make sense to an extent. But also your ignorance, whether you want to use it as an excuse or not, your ignorance shouldn't be something that I can attack you, that I should be attacking you on, because I should also understand your side of it to an extent. So again, like I say, we all have to take responsibility for us, how we got here, as well as where we're going. I have to be able to have that conversation with you, maybe try to educate you or whatever, point you in the right direction and say, listen, maybe you have been, but I'm not going to judge you on it. What I'm going to do is try to make sure that you understand moving forward and do my part in that, instead of me just sitting there saying, yeah, you're just ignorant, and just walk away and just live in that realm. Like that's not fair, to be completely honest.
And I think that's why dialogue is so important. Just having a conversation, asking questions, but then having the opportunity or the relationships to have somebody to call to ask. So I grew up near Amish country. Okay, I'm gonna be really honest with you. There was one black dude in my high school. One black guy, okay? And that was my sophomore year, and he was there for a year, quite honestly. The other time I grew up, until I was 10, grew up in Maine. I never saw one black individual, and that's not a lie, right? And so for me, when I'm young, even up until I'm 16, really don't have, apart from watching, movies or sporting events or going on vacation, I'm not interacting with anybody who's not white. Right? And so I would say my ignorance of what you talked about was extremely high. But because I now intentionally am in relationships with as many walks of life as possible, I'm able to ask questions and say, tell me about that. Am I wrong on this? Give me your perspective on that. And my hope is that out of relationship, if I call you, that I can ask a question and the response isn't one of like, let me fill you in, you idiot. You know what I mean? But it's like, well, he doesn't know and he's reaching out to ask. You know what I mean? Right. And that's where we meet, you know?
And one of the things I think, even in this conversation, and when I speak of responsibility and stuff, is admittedly, in a lot of ways, I don't understand a lot of the stories he just spoke of from the police's perspective, as far as that emotion that you go through. You're leaving that home, you're having to tell that family, and then you're moving on to a completely different situation, almost having to block out something that happened 10 minutes ago. And it's really not fair to even expect that. So, like, to an extent, we have on our own been ignorant to understanding that side, and it's our responsibility to being able to hear those stories and seeing that, because hopefully, if the Black community is really wanting change, and we're wanting to move forward, we have to be able to also listen to that perspective. Because if we do, then it's going to begin to make us believe, like, man, maybe we are putting them in a whole different situation, a whole different realm that we shouldn't even be considering putting them into. So it's only as fair, and this has kind of been my argument up to this point anyway, is it's only as fair for us to be able to understand other people's thoughts and not just our own as a Black community, and just going out here and just fighting against this stuff. Because to me, it's completely belligerent in my mind to think that we can be in a pandemic, people have not worked for so long, a lot of people don't have any money, so forth, so on, and then, you know, we're seeing things such as the looting and burning stuff and stuff like that. It's just like, on one hand, you're fighting because you want to be able to have that, but you're taking it away from the next person. And in a lot of ways, that next person is somebody that is in your community. I mean, there are Black people there are Black teenagers that may be trying to save up money for college, and they work at that, you know, that auto parts store that you just burnt down. Sure. So it's just like, come on, like, we have to be able to see both sides of it. You know what I mean? There's Black families that are going out and trying to feed their kids, but now they're not able to make that money because they can't go to work tomorrow, or maybe they have money and they want to go to that corner store, but that corner store is burnt down, so I can't even go buy milk for my babies. Like, so it's ignorant for us to even begin to do these things without being able to see everybody's perspective. And us as a Black community, you know, just to call a spade a spade, us as a Black community, we can't sit here and try to fight and say, you know, we can't just hear and say, like, Black lives matter, although they do matter, and we want to be able to have that inclusion, but it's not okay for us to only fight for that. We have to be able to fight for every part, because we want to be we want to be a part of that community that we're fighting against as well. So it's almost, I hope that makes sense. I feel like that came across wrong, but I think all in all, we have to take responsibility to being able to understand that your upbringing may not have been around much of diversity.
No. Zero.
I
mean, unless you count Amish folk, I don't feel bad talking about Amish. They're not going to see this anyway.
The same as the police community, or you know, whatever the case may be. I think it's important for us to take responsibility and listening and understanding that side, and finding solutions, and not making excuses, and finding solutions.
Right, and that's why I agree with you 100% with what you were saying, and that's why I've brought the aspect of mental health, because I want to know what his mental health is when he's dealing with the calls that he deals with, going from one situation to the next, dealing with the people who are out there rioting and looting, and seeing what their mental health perspective is. And that's why I brought up where this is coming from, so that people do understand that this is where we were, this is where we are, this is where the mindset is at, to why I think it's okay, not me personally, but why I, as a person who would go out and steal and loot during this time, would, in my mind, justify being okay with doing that, when it's actually not. But it's a person's state of mind based on their experiences, and that's why people do what they do. It's the same reason as to why somebody who goes out to work every day and makes the decisions that they make when they're on the job. It's the state of mind is what we really need to look at, because I don't know what just happened to you 10 minutes ago. I have no idea. And the same thing is the person that may be getting pulled over. I don't know what happened to them 10 minutes ago. And so it is about the dialogue. It is about being able to open up and discuss and then find solutions. But we need to be more patient with each other in terms of our state of mind and our mental health. And like I said, and that's why I made the point early on in the conversation, that on top of what is happening racially in our country, people were already dealing with the pandemic. People were isolated, they were in their homes, and during that kind of a time, people start to get depressed, people start to get antsy or squirrely, as you mentioned it before. But those are mental health states of mind. So then when something like that happens and it's on top of what I've already been feeling and what I've already been going through mentally, and now I get this and I see this on TV, and if I've got this kind of a history or this kind of life experience, now I think it's okay for me to go out there and start just tearing up everything. Let me just burn it down. Well, no, because every point that you just made about now I've maybe taken opportunities away from people who had already been struggling because their stores were closed. I just made it 100 times worse. So now we've got an even bigger problem. And that's what I mean by people's state of mind. And if we don't deal with what is happening, if we don't deal with the underlying issues, I hate to say this, but I can pretty much call it what you want, a prediction, I don't know, but it could be 100 times worse the next time. That's what I'm afraid of.
And that's what you walk into. That's what you're walking in, right? A lot of times.
And you know, we're talking about the mental health, and again, for law enforcement, because that's what I can refer to. The officers down in Columbus, I've worked, not even with Columbus, I'm just going down to help, mutual aid to help them. I've worked 12 days straight. Today's my only day off. I'm going back tomorrow because of another protest. And so I get one day off. Literally I get a little bit of time in the morning with my kids and I'm gone. Those guys down there, they're working 12-hour mandated days. They got one day off. That was all they're getting right now. And they're right back at it. I gained 30 pounds when I get dressed for work in gear. They're putting that same gear on plus more. You know, the extra shin guards, extra pads, the helmets, all that stuff. They're putting all that on. So these guys are gaining 40, 50 pounds potentially.
And it's 100 degrees.
And it's hot. It's hot. And it's the same thing with dealing with your kids when you tell them to go pick up your Legos. 5 minutes later, hey, I told you to go pick up your Legos. Third time, you're screaming out, I told you to go pick up your Legos. And the fourth time probably means maybe you're getting a whooping, whatever, however you handle your kids, and you're going to your room. It's kind of the same aspect. You gotta break it down in small. You're having these guys who are fatigued mentally and physically. Early on, I'm sure their voices were, get to the sidewalk, guys, go over the sidewalk, guys. As that day progresses, you're going to see, you can call it police brutality, you can label it whatever you want. You're going to see it get escalated. It don't matter black, white, whatever. It don't matter police officer or not. That's how we all operate. After 10 times of saying something, you tend to break down and lash out. Whether it's against your wife, your kids, or a police officer against other people, you're going to break down. It's going to come out. Unfortunately, those people see that breakdown and that's it. They didn't follow that officer around for the last 10 or 12 hours. And all of a sudden, like, he only yelled at her one time and then pepper sprayed him. It might not be right. They have rules of engagement. I don't know all their protocols. They have rules of engagement, that how they handle things. But there's fatigue there, mental and physical fatigue. And at times as law enforcement, I don't think people look for that or understand what we're going through also on this end. I can tell you right now, I have not met a law enforcement officer who has defended the murder of George Floyd. Not once. All these other ones we'll just go back 5 to 10 years, they've been publicized. There's, on average, I can't go to every single specific one in details, but there's always been some little twist that you've been able to say, well, I may have not used that tactic, I may have taken this approach, but in the end, legally he had a right to be there, do the right to do what he did. Things sometimes there's not one officer who said twisted this to say I am not heard it yet. And I can tell you right now, those guys standing there with those shields and all that gear, they're looking at you saying, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I'm not here to fight you about this. We have a job to do.
Yeah.
We have a task that's given to them. But they're beat down, and mentally they're worn
I
out.
think it's important for us to understand that, and just being devil's advocate a little bit, because I can see both sides of it. The argument to a lot of that is maybe when you look at this George Floyd specific situation in this cop, and when his record is put out into the public and has been talked about, of having the 17 or 19 previous what's the word I'm looking for? Complaints, like officer complaints, and he's been put on leave before, and they continue to allow certain people to come back to the force for little stuff like that. Even I was reading a couple days ago of in 2018 in Columbus specifically, there was a situation of a police officer that curb stomped this gentleman on the ground, and he got fired. But then I want to say it was like 6 months later or a year later or whatever, they hired him back onto the force, and the mayor tried to justify the reasoning of being able to bring him back on. Like, yeah, I mean, I understand that side of it as well, and I hope that we can be strong enough mentally to be able to understand, like, this is, maybe it's an outlier, so to speak, or maybe we really should think into the mentality of the police officers and stuff, and understanding that side.
We have split seconds to handle ourselves. And, things, adrenaline dumps, they get hot. That specific one you're talking about, there was some shooting just before. The suspect, I know, still had a gun on him when all that happened. The tactic was horrible. That's a horrible tactic. It was. It shouldn't have been used. The downfall is we're judged on our actions, and we have split seconds to decide, am I going to grab this arm, am I going to punch here, am I going to kick there, all kinds of things in situations. And it's an unfortunate scenario where it's tough. You're tough. You're trying to control your emotions. You're chasing people down. You're tackling people because they're running from you. Everything's justified in all that. We make poor decisions. It's going to happen. There's plenty of times you said stuff in an argument to your wife where you say it and you're like, shoot. And it's gone. It's out. You said it. You can't take it back. And it did not. It just fueled the fire. It's just a bigger picture here.
You see it in sports all the time. Think about it. Watching the NFL, here are the most elite pro, train their whole life, play their whole life, split-second decisions, and they mess up all the time.
Yep.
They jump start. It's not like they want to do that. They have trained their mind their entire life.
Yep.
But, and it's a foul. It's whatever.
It affects everybody.
Affects everybody, affects everything. They step out of bounds accidentally. They do whatever. It's not that they want to commit those things at times. I think the question is, maybe, are there people who want to commit those things and are taking advantages of situations, right? So a guy like you, and by and large, prayerfully, most people who are entrusted with keeping us safe and watching over us, most prayerfully are like, man, we got a split second, pray for us.
Yeah.
Be there for us, understand that position. But are there, maybe some of the question is like, are there some people who are like, no, I'm going to take advantage of that situation?
Yeah.
I'm sure they exist.
Yeah.
And for me, around me, in the where I work, no. I don't see it happening. And
Unfortunately, the bad thing about it is these situations aren't happening in the communities that the good police officers are in.
Yeah.
And it sucks to say it, because like I seen somebody say like not all cops are bad.
Yeah.
It's like, sure, but how come we keep being put in the situations with the bad cops? You know what I mean? Like, and it's unfortunate, but in some ways it's in that realm.
I personally, I think has a lot to do with just kind of what you were talking about, PT. It's a lack of education. If you don't spend time around people who don't look like you or other cultures, you're not going to really know a lot about what they go through. Yeah. You're not. And it was kind of like what we were talking about on Wednesday about your experiences versus my experiences. Yeah. They're different. Yeah. I don't know what other people who are not from my ethnic group or my culture experience. I would be lying if I said, oh yeah, I know exactly what it's like to be a cop. No, I don't. Never been a cop. Oh, sure, I know exactly what it's like to be a man. No, I don't. I'm not a man. So I can't even begin to understand it, but that's where education comes in, conversations like this. But here's an example. In growing up in school, you know, everybody has, like, for example, history class. For me, I was kind of the other side of that. Yeah. My high school was like 99% black. Okay. My neighborhood, 99% black. Yeah. But for example, when I went to history class, I learned about American history, I learned about European history, and I learned about world history. Now I can tell you what was in those books that we read, that we studied, we took tests on. And the little blurb that even mentioned people who looked like me was, you lived in Africa, long story short, you lived in Africa, you were brought here, you were slaves, and then there was the civil rights movement, and then here we are today. And that was basically it. And it was like maybe a chapter. Wow. Out of the entire time that I was in school. That's what I learned. And so I can't expect that when I come out into the real world and I'm in the workforce, I'm meeting friends, I'm in college, for anyone who's not me to understand or know anything about me, because you don't learn about me in school. But I can tell you a lot about you. And it was one of the first experiences that I had in college, because I went to OU and in 1990, where it was not very many Black people. They were there, but not very many. And I used to get asked a lot of questions. And I wasn't used to that, because once again, I'm coming from a 99% African-American community, including my school, my high school. And so here I come, and I'm dropped in the middle of Athens, Ohio, if anybody's ever been there. Yeah. That in itself, I mean, I'm in Appalachia. And I'm getting asked these questions by other students who come from different backgrounds, come from different countries, and they're asking me questions about my hair. And I'm thinking, why don't you know this? And then and they're asking me questions about, well, do Black people do this? Well, do Black people do that? And I'm thinking, where are you from? That's my first, like, where are you from? Because I'm like, you've never been around Black people? Well, no, I never been around Black people. Okay, so then we started having some conversations, even some of my really good friends to this day. That's how we became friends, because it was them not knowing a whole lot about me as a person, because again, I'm not in the books. Yeah. So when we're studying these things in school, there's no real mention of me except for maybe that little blurb that I spoke about. And it's like, but wait a minute, we had a history before that. I never learned about that. That was something that I had to read on my own. I had to do the research, I had to study. And so when you start to understand these things, it's like, as far as like where people's perspectives and the lenses that they're looking through at the world in, the experiences are different, and we do need to be able to have some sort of a platform where we can learn about each other. I think that's one of the things that in my profession, if you start to know more about the person, if they start to become more of a person to you instead of an object or a thing, because if I don't know anything about you, you're just Dylan, you know, whatever. Yeah, well,
even less than that, he's just white man.
He's just white man.
Do you know what I mean?
Dylan doesn't even have a name. You're right. Yeah. Just white guy over there. And it's like, right, just black man, whatever. So it's like, you have no identity to me. Mm-hmm. So obviously I'm not really gonna care too much about you, because I don't know you. I don't know anything about you. But it puts it personalizes who you are if I do know your name. It personalizes you and makes you more of a human to me if I do know some of your experiences. It makes you more of a person and more of a human if I can see what your home life is like. If I sit down and actually have a meal with you.
There's community.
Community. We don't have that, and that's where we're really falling short. We don't have that. And I think if we take more of an approach of being able to get to know each other, make it a point to find out about the next person. Ask the questions. Don't be mad when people ask questions. Answer the questions. I think things will start to get a little better. I think we will start to see some of the change that you were asking about. How do we do this? That's how we do it. We got to start looking at each other as people, number one, and not just the white guy over there or the black girl over there or the black guy, the cop over there. People. He has a family. People that love him. He has a family. People that love him. You have a family, people that love you. I have a family, people that love me. And the funny thing about this whole situation and what we're going through is that when you actually get down to the core of it, everybody wants the same thing. We all do. And that is we want peace, we want unity, and we want equality. That's what we want. But the problem is if I don't see you even as being a person, I don't try to get to know you, then your agenda really doesn't matter.
And I think that's why what you said is so good. You know, Black Lives Matter. And I love what you said. And I don't think you're saying it from an organizational standpoint. I think you're saying it from an acknowledgement standpoint, right? Like, but I think sometimes as a white individual, not trying to speak for every white person, when somebody says, "Hey, Black lives are important. Black lives matter," what I think sometimes we say is, "Well, all lives matter." And that's out of ignorance and not understanding even Christ's position. Think about it. Like, do all lives matter? Yes. But Jesus had specific times where he talked specifically about children. All lives matter, but Jesus had moments where he talked about children and elevated that conversation. Do all lives matter to Jesus? Of course, but there's times when he sat with a woman at a well and women mattered. Do you see what I'm saying? Do all lives matter? Yes, of course, but there was times where he talked and highlighted a Samaritan in the story. Good grief, Jesus is in the book of Luke referred to as the Good Shepherd. Why? Because he left all of them and went after that one sheep. Why? Because that one sheep mattered. And so was that one sheep more important than all the other sheep? No, but it's just highlighting that sometimes, like, we can acknowledge that we need to go here and that also these sheep are important. Black people or white people are important. But when you say black people are important and white people, you know, it doesn't have to be like either or. It can be both. And in a moment when there's hurt and pain and frustration and abuse and all this stuff, it's not a threat to say Black Lives Matter. Well, yeah, of course. You know what I mean? Right. And we don't have to feel like we need to retaliate by saying, well, all lives matter. Right. Yeah, but all lives don't matter until Black lives matter in proportion to white lives. Is that fair?
Yeah. So we've got just a couple minutes left. So I want to kind of jump into just a couple things real quick, and we'll wrap it up. I want to ask you to do something that you weren't prepared to do, but in a minute or less, I want to ask you, as a white man, as a police officer, what would you say in a minute or less to the black community that you feel they need to hear?
I'd say that in general, racism is everywhere. It exists in some way. There's stereotypes. Sometimes stereotypes may be okay to use in things, and they're not okay in some ways. They may be looked at as racist. In general, as law enforcement, I don't feel that racism is rampant. I feel that there's a lack of training, lack of social diversity, lack of mental health. We're worn down, the stuff you're dealing with, and people tend to act inappropriately when they do that. There will always be bad cops. till the end of the day, there will always be a bad cop somewhere that's corrupt, and things of that nature. There will always be a bad pastor somewhere. It's going to exist forever. Sin is rampant. No matter what we do to show Jesus to people, sin is within all of us, and we're all going to make mistakes. I can tell you, especially from the most recent incidents, that police support the black community and what happened, 100%. We think it's wrong. We know that there needs to be justice, and we know that there will be justice. I don't know to what extent there will be. It will be done. And I hope when that justice comes, that as law enforcement in the black community, we can work together and be happy with it. And we don't have to this reemerge again. I can truly say that you have our support. We're here, and I hope this will continue to grow and understand this open dialogue. Just this little bit that we've had, there's things I've picked up on that I did not know that. So I think open dialogue will be great. Good. Arguing, fighting, and screaming does not work for A-type personalities. I think quiet, calm, open dialogue will help law enforcement a lot better, because that would be a trouble for us.
Tina, I want to ask you same question, but in a minute or less, what would you say to the white community right now?
Well, we do understand that there are issues in your communities as well. We do know that your lives matter. Definitely don't want to take anything away from that, because as I stated before, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, and I do believe that all lives matter. There's no question about that. I would say to the white community, be willing to have that open dialogue. Be willing to listen to us. And I would even say to my own black community, be willing to listen and ask questions as well, because it's a two-way street. I would also say to the white community, learn. Just learn about maybe people that you've never really learned about before, because there are many different components and parts to who we are, and our experiences internally have been differently, even across the board. But that understand also that all black people are not against you. That's what I would like to say too, because sometimes I think maybe that might be a perception. And I personally don't feel that way. Again, my household is comprised of all three of those things, white, black, and cop. So I would just say to the white community, just listen, be open, and because I know I'm willing to do the same.
Yeah, that's good. I want to ask you a similar question.
Yeah.
What would you say to the church right now?
Yeah, I would say that, we're only as strong as we are united, and that means across the board, racially and whatnot. I think the role of the church is to stand as a beacon of the gospel. And so even when we don't have things that we find familiarity on, the thing that we can find, unification on is the gospel. And so when we have gospel-centered conversations, we have gospel-centered relationships. And when there's gospel-centered relationships, not to be whatever, but it doesn't matter. In the context of a gospel-centered relationship, it doesn't matter what color you are. Amen. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. It doesn't matter if you're old or young. We have connection on the basis of Jesus Christ. Yeah. And so we need to get outside of our walls with that message. Yeah. But I also think praying, it's, one of the things I've heard here from you as somebody who attends our church, is, man, you need to know just how much you are prayed for during the day when you're going from that death, going to the barking dog, going to the next thing. We have people in place that are praying for you, shooting you texts, letting you know, hey, we're here for you. Hey, what do you need? How you feeling? Like, we can support much better. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Well, just want to wrap up here. Appreciate everybody joining into the conversation. I know for us, I think all of us here have probably learned a little something, seen a little bit more into this perspective of every person that's represented here. Of course, we don't speak for all of the white community. Of course, you guys don't speak for all of the black community, and you don't speak for all of the law enforcement community. But I think conversations like this are super beneficial to move us forward. I think everybody in this room truly wants that. We recognize there's a problem. We recognize that we need to be part of the solution. And everybody here, as you probably picked up, is a Christian too. And we truly want to see Jesus unify people all across the globe, regardless of your skin color, regardless of your belief system, regardless of your background, regardless of your situation. You all matter. Now, I want to say specifically to the black community, we're with you. We support you. We love you. Your lives matter. Your lives matter. You have so much inherent worth and value because you're a child of God. That's the same for all of our law enforcement officers too. I would say the same thing about you. We want to see everybody come together, realize there's maybe not as much divide as we think there is. There's issues we need to fix. There's some things that we didn't get into today that I wanted to, like institutional racism, systemic racism, things that truly do happen to black people on a daily basis that maybe don't get enough publicity, that maybe we'll talk about on another session. But I think this is a good start. Sit down with the people that you don't understand. Learn about them. Sit down with people that don't look like you. Sit down with people that grew up in Amish America that I didn't know. I grew up right outside of Baltimore City, Maryland. My understanding of the white community is very different than yours. My understanding of the black community is very different than yours. And so much is different between just the two of us. And we look, quote unquote, the same, right? So sit down with the people. I think you said it best. Let's strive for community. Let's strive to understand each other, regardless of our perceived differences, and find that there are some things that we can agree on, that every single one in this room matters, regardless of their past, regardless of their appearance. We all matter just the same, and we've got to come together. The church, and I would say, we've got to do better. We've got to stand in the gap. I love what you said. Gospel-filled relationships throw out every single form of prejudice, throw out every single form of racism, and the gospel itself condemns it all. And so we need to stand on that, and we need to use our voices. We need to speak up for the people that are hurting, those that feel like they don't have hope. That's our job. That's the church. That's what Christians do. And right now, there's a certain house that's burning, and we all need to make sure we put out that fire for real and build it back up. So let's be a part of the change. Let's be a part of the movement. Thanks for joining in. Maybe we'll do this again in the future, but let's all be a part of the change.